Hello everybody, my name is Jordan Schutz and I work at MuleSoft as a developer advocate. Today in this video, we're going to be going over how to get started using the DataWeave language, and this is the second part in the series, so make sure to go back and watch the first video if you haven't already. So on the left-hand side, we have this payload, which is an object, and inside the payload, we have an array called entries. And this array contains different information like first name, last name, the company, and the email of each user. But as you will notice, it's actually not sorted in any particular manner. So what we've done is we've written a DataWeave script that takes payload.entries, so looks through this array of values, and uses this question mark, which is also known as a filter selector, which basically searches through an array or an object for all the key value pairs that match with what's contained in here. So we use the $sign, which is basically a condition, and this is known as a single value selector, which will return any value that belongs to its corresponding key. So in this case, the key is company, so it's going to go through each of the entries and look at the company key, and then is going to see if it matches up with equals MuleSoft. So that's why you see on the output here that we have this object being returned, because this company is equal to MuleSoft. However, if we change this, let's say to Salesforce, you'll notice that it will return these two arrays here because the company matches Salesforce. So we can do this with a number of things, like let's say last name, we want to sort it and we want to sort it by Mule, it'll return this object. So that's just one example on how you can use the filter selector and the single value selector to basically sort through an array of values and grab data out of it. So next up, I want to cover the map command, because the map command is actually one of the most used functions in the DataWeave language because it helps integration developers perform complex transformations. So there's going to be many cases where you have a payload in one format and you're actually going to need to take that payload, make modifications to it, add things to the payload, remove things from the payload, and then send that out to that outbound system, which requires that data to be in a certain format. So in this specific use case, we have first name, last name, and company. However, the output system requires that we have a full name field, and this could be a common thing that you see in certain systems. So we're basically going to remap the payload to format the data in the way that we want the end system to receive it in. So we're going to include an index, which is going to start at 0 and then is going to increment by 1, 2, 3, etc. for every entry that's in the array. And then we're going to create a field called full name. And in this field, we're going to say item.firstname, and then we're going to concatenate an empty string to add the white space. And then we're going to say item.lastName, and then this is going to basically create the full name field here, which you can see on the output, which says Max the Mule. So you can basically map the data and output it in whatever format you wish, but that's just the power of the map tool, and it allows you to basically create the data in any structure that you wish. So now that we've taken a quick look on how to build a basic transformation using the map command, let's take a look on how to map using selectors. So on the left-hand side, we have an object and we have an array called account type. Nested under that array, we have a users array and an admins array with objects underneath it with the key name and company with that information listed on the right. And so we actually want to output that data in the following format on the right-hand side. So we want to display an index count, and we want to display account info with the name and the company nested in that array. So in order to create this transformation, we can do payload.accountType, which is looking at all the data in here. And then we can use the star selector to select all of the entries that are listed under this admins array here. And then we can map it to essentially map the data in whatever format we wish. So we're going to include the $sign, which is going to include the index. And so for this use case, the index is going to stay at 0 because we only have one array called admins. And then we're going to list out the name and the company under account info under this array, because the single $sign essentially searches through this array for a key called name, and then we'll print it out as the output. And then it's also looking for a key called company, and we'll print it out as the output. But let's say we want to just change this to a single $sign. What this will actually do is this will print out the entire object depending upon what we're actually searching for. So if we want to change this instead of admins to be users, it will print out both of the objects that are listed here because it's basically printing out every single object that's under the user's array. So now that you have a better understanding of how to use the map command, I want to bring to light that there actually is a map object command. And the difference between this map command and the map object command is that the output will actually be defined as an object instead of an array, which in the last two examples, the output was in an array format. So we're going to use the same initial payload, but our output is actually going to look different in this example. So we're saying payload.account type, and we're going to be looking at the very first entry in this account type array, which is this entire object here. And inside of this object is a user's array, once again, and an admin's array. And so we want to basically redisplay this as the output as an index, and then we want to display the key. And then we want to also display under account info the value of whatever is inside of those keys. So you can see on the right-hand side that we have index as users and index as admins, which are found right here because these are the different indexes that are in this overall object. And then you'll notice that under account info, we have an array with the objects nested inside of it. And we can do some changes to this to make it different. Let's say we want to add an additional object. We can add a comma to the payload. We can add another object, and we can also change the name. Instead of Jordan, we can call this Bob. We can just call all of them Bob. And then when we go and we remap it and we change it to 1, you'll notice that now it's grabbing all this data instead of this data here. So the map object command is very, very powerful. And I just want to reiterate that the output is going to be an object instead of an array. So there's another function in DataWeave called pluck, which is almost the exact opposite as the map object function. So pluck is used to map objects and return the resulting payload into an array. And so how pluck works is it iterates over an object and returns an array of keys, values, or indices from the object. So in this example, what we're doing is we're basically formatting the output in the same format as the map object example. However, the main difference between pluck and map object, as demonstrated below, is that the output is actually an array instead of an object. So we're once again accessing payload and account type, and then we're grabbing this as the object, which is 0, and then we're going to pluck the value, the key, and the index out of it. So we're defining the index, and it's actually going to be 0 because users is the very first index in the overall account type array. And then we're going to define key, which is users in this case. And then account info, once again, is going to be a string, and under that array is going to be the value of whatever is inside of the overall users array. And so pluck is also a powerful tool that you can use, and it's an alternative to map function if you want to output an array instead of an object. So with the pluck, map, and map object commands, you can create some very complex transformations and transform data from one structure to another fairly easily. So next up, we're actually going to look at the filter function, which iterates over an array and applies an expression that returns matching values of that expression. So we can look at the new array listed in the payload here, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we basically grab that payload and we apply a filter to it with the item and the index. And essentially what it's saying is that if the item is greater than or equal to 2, send that to the output. So with that math equation, that basically excludes every single value besides 1. So that's why the resulting output is only 2, 3, 4, 5. So as we learned, map returns an array, map object returns an object. However, the same is true for filter. So filter returns an array, however, filter object returns an object. So you're going to use these depending upon what your desired output type requires. So for this specific use case, we have a payload that's an object, and each of these keys are different, but the values of these keys are essentially iterating by 1. And so in our payload, we filter by an object, and we filter by the value, the key, and the index. And so when the value, which are these values here, are greater than or equal to 2, then we're going to display that output here. And so that's why you'll notice that count 1 is omitted because the value is not greater than or equal to 2. So the last function that we're going to go over in this video is the reduce function. And what the reduce function allows you to do is it allows you to operate on each value of an array and return a single value once the iteration has been complete. So reduce essentially takes two arguments. The first represents the current value of the iteration, which is defined by the single $sign, and the accumulator, which is defined as the double $sign. And the accumulator stores whatever the most recent result is after the current iteration. So you can essentially think about this as it goes 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, and it's calculating what the next number is and what the previous number is, and then is adding that up and storing that value in memory, but then outputting the final value here. So there are more examples of things that you can do with the reduce function. So let's look at this function, for instance, which is a little different. And we can change these to easier to consume numbers. So let's change the payload. Instead of 5, let's do 2. So what you'll see is that we're reducing each item and we're setting the accumulator value to 2. And so every time it iterates through the array, we're basically saying 2 times the item. So since we're getting 32, you can essentially look at this equation like this. We're going 2 times, and then since it's iterating through the array, we're going 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and that's equal to 32. So reduce allows you to basically take a sum of values in an array, do some iteration on each value, and then return a single output. So I hope that this tutorial has helped you all. If you guys have any questions about DataWeave or have any improvements or things you want us to cover in a future video, reach out to us at MuleDev on Twitter and we'll get back to you, and we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.